Hello everybody and welcome to a very special board game review and gameplay demo. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite games of political intrigue and tactical decision making. It is a Game of Thrones. Now before I really get into it though, as always I would like to invite you, if you haven't done so already, to please take a look at my Facebook and my Twitter as well as my brand new Instagram page. That's right, I'm on all the social medias now. These are great ways for you to keep in touch with me as well as see the latest news, new videos, fun articles, and all sorts of other stuff. In addition, I've got my new Patreon page as well. This is a great way for you guys to actually sponsor my channel, and you can control what I do, when I do it, and all of that kind of stuff. So you can see a lot more behind the scenes stuff as well. That said, we're going to get right on ahead into Game of Thrones. So for those of you who are unaware, this is based off of the George R.R. Martin series by the same name. It's a really big game. It's designed for 3 to 6 players, and it takes hours and hours to play. However, you are talking about a lot of different elements. You're talking about political intrigue. You're talking about the tactical decision making, unit moving, area control, supply control, economics, all sorts of different stuff. It's absolutely amazing. It's an incredibly deep game. I can't wait to talk about it. So we're going to get right on ahead with what this game is similar to. As far as similarities are concerned, there are a few that I wanted to mention. First and foremost is diplomacy. The main similarity here is the fact that you do have that diplomatic negotiation, a lot of table talk, all of that kind of stuff. And to the extent of diplomacy, you don't see that in Game of Thrones, but you do have a lot of alliance making and breaking. There is a really robust, beautiful political aspect to Game of Thrones that, in my opinion, actually exceeds what diplomacy does. Because for diplomacy, it's all based off of what the people do, but in the Game of Thrones, it's really inherent in the mechanics of the game itself. So it's absolutely incredible and it's a lot of fun. That said, again, with diplomacy, it's a lot more focused on the negotiation specifically, whereas with this, it's a little bit more narrow in scope, but you do have a lot of interest in it. Next up, it might come as a surprise to you guys, but it is Small World is the other game that I wanted to talk about, or one of the other games. And the reason is because you do have a very heavy area control aspect to Game of Thrones. In addition, not only are you moving your militaries around, but you're also sort of dropping influence markers to show that you still own that area. In the game, it's represented as like you're assessing taxes and you have support of the local lords and nobles and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that you still gain the benefit of being in that area. And in Small World, you have something very similar where, again, you're talking about area control, moving around, and sort of dropping your guys off type of thing. Now, Small World, obviously much more simplistic than Game of Thrones, but it's a very key mechanic to the entire game. Last but not least, another aspect as far as a key mechanic is Kingsburg. Now, Kingsburg is similar to Game of Thrones in that you've got different people sort of working towards the same thing, but doing it in potentially different ways. However, there is always the ever apparent threat that everybody eventually has to fight. And in the case of Game of Thrones, that's the wildlings on the wall. So at some point they're going to attack and everybody has to jump to the defense of Westeros. Same thing in Kingsburg. At the end of every round, everybody is fighting off a bad guy. Now in Kingsburg, you do it individually, whereas in Game of Thrones, you're doing it all collectively. So it's interesting because you get sort of a forced cooperation aspect even with the people you don't like. And if one person tanks everything, then they are going to get punished the worst in Game of Thrones. And so in that sense, it's kind of similar because, again, you got similar thematics and a similar idea of the whole everybody coming together as sort of like banding together to make one thing. So effectively, if you took diplomacy plus Small World plus Kingsburg and sort of mashed them together, you would have something somewhat similar to what Game of Thrones offers. However, the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts. So with that, I'm going to get right on ahead into my gameplay demo of how to play a Game of Thrones. Alright everybody, we're all set up and ready to start playing a Game of Thrones. As you can see, this is a pretty big game, so I'm going to go step by step going through the components and the setup and all of that, so hopefully you guys can get a good idea of how this works. Starting with the general setup, each player is going to get all of the different house components for their particular house. In this case, I've got 4 players playing as Lannister, Greyjoy, Stark, and Baratheon. Now, these are not houses that I picked. In the rulebook, it states which houses you use whenever you have fewer than 6 players. The other 2 houses that we will not be playing with are Martell and Tyrell. Again, if you are playing with more than 4 players, you would add one of those. Now, each player starts with all of their unit tokens, which include boats, footmen, knights, and siege engines. Everybody starts with their house cards, which are used during combat. Everybody plays one of those. You also start with all of your order tokens. These are what you put on the map during the planning phase to show what your units are going to be doing. And everybody also starts with 5 power tokens of their color. These act as sort of currency during bidding, as well as indicating that you own areas of the map without leaving units there. All of the other power tokens are going to be off to the side of the board in the sort of power pool, and we can potentially earn them back. In addition, everybody is going to start with a player screen specific to their house. This is a really nice reference sheet for everybody where it tells you what each individual order type does, which is very helpful during the game. It also shows you a map of where your individual units start, specifically on the board. It also shows you the text for where those units start, and below that, it tells you where you start on these individual tracks. Now, these tracks represent sort of the politics of the game over on this side with these 3, the supply chain of the game so that you can tell how big your armies can be, and then over here these are essentially the victory tracks. The way that these work for the victory tracks is that is the game timer. This game ends either after a total of 10 rounds or when somebody controls 7 areas that contain either a castle or a stronghold. In the case of a round end of the game, then whoever is highest up with the number of strongholds and castles wins the game. As soon as somebody gets to 7, though, no matter what round it is, they will win and the game will end. The supply chain indicates how large people's armies can be. If you have just a single unit by itself, it does not count as an army. But if you have 2 or more units together, whether it's 2 foot soldiers or a foot soldier and a knight, anything like that, then you have to obey the supply rules. If you have no supplies, you can have 2 armies that are each 2 individual units, whatever they happen to be. If you've got a single supply barrel, you can have a single army of 3 and another army of 2, etc., etc. And essentially, the barrels are obtained by controlling certain areas of the map that have the barrel symbol on it. Last but not least, the political intrigue aspect of this game. We have 3 individual tracks that we're going to be building off of: the Iron Throne track, the Fiefdoms track, and the King's Court. Each of these give a specific dominance token of some sort that indicates who is in charge of that track, and they also give some sort of special ability as well. For the Iron Throne track, the main thing this does is it allows the turn order, right? So the turn order goes from the farthest to the symbol back down. So in this case, Baratheon starts on the Iron Throne. They will be going first during the game. In addition, anytime there is a tie in the game, whether it's with bidding or things of that nature, then the person who is sitting on the Iron Throne determines the victor, right? For the Fiefdoms track, the person who has it will get the Valyrian Steel Blade. During combat, once per round, they can flip it over, and this indicates that they have used it to add 1 combat strength to that combat. In addition, whenever you are fighting somebody else, whoever is higher up on the fiefdom track will win ties. Last but not least, the King's Court. Whoever has the King's Court dominance will get the Raven token. The Raven token allows you to either swap out a single order token after it's been placed and everything's been revealed. You can flip it over and swap it out, or you can take a look at the Wildlings card. These are the nasty little guys that'll come and attack us during the game. You can take a look at it and either put it back on the top or put it on the bottom of the deck, essentially knowing what's coming. The other important aspect for the King's Court, is that indicates how many of the special order tokens you can use. Every order token type has a special version that gives a specific bonus. If you are first on the King's Court track, you can use 3. If you're second, you can use 2. Third can use 1. Fourth can use none of the special track. In addition, for 3 or 4 players, we are using this sort of overlay for the King's Court. If you don't have 3 or 4, if you're playing with 5 or 6 players, then you have different numbers of the special tokens that can be used by the different numbers of players. So those are the main aspects over there. Next up here, we've got the wildlings track. The wildlings are going to come and attack us whenever this reaches up to here at 12. We will flip over a card and see what's going to happen. The way that this goes up is primarily through these Westeros cards. These are fairly similar to things like in Arkham Horror where you have the Mythos cards. Effectively what we're going to do is we're going to draw one from each pile and we're going to resolve them in order. So we resolve the first one first, second one second, and third one third. Now these do a whole lot of different things and I'll go over that when I get to that point in the game, but effectively that's it for the generalized setup. After everybody is done and ready to go, then we can get started. One thing to note is that there are 2 quick reference sheets, so I recommend having them both out on the table, especially if you're playing with newer players so that they can get a quick glance at what's what. You can see all the iconography is on here to tell you what's what, and on the back it gives you a summary of all of the Westeros cards so you know exactly what they mean. Last but not least, if you are playing again with fewer than 6 players, you will have some of these neutral tokens. These neutral tokens just indicate the fact that there is some sort of like barbarian type garrison at certain locations on the map. And essentially what this does is it doesn't necessarily lock up places on the map, but it means that you can't simply move freely around. You're going to have to fight something in order to get, especially down here at the southern end of Westeros. In the case of having only 3 players, a lot of these will be locked up and it'll be represented by a little tilde symbol. If there's a tilde symbol, then that means that you can't enter that at all, which just means that you have a smaller area to fight for, and it means that you will have a much more exciting game even with fewer players. Moving right into things, each round consists of 3 main phases: the Westeros phase, the planning phase, and the action phase. I already basically described the Westeros phase, which is when we draw these 3 cards and again resolve them in order from 1, 2, and 3. Now essentially the first one has a lot of like sort of housekeeping things. For example, we've got supply, which means that you reconcile whatever your supply is, so you'll be moving up or down depending on if you gained or lost territory on the map. In other words, if you move into a new territory and you claim it, then you do not immediately move yourself up on the supply track. Just like if you lose one, then you don't immediately move down. It's only after this happens that that occurs, and you have to adjust the sizes of your militaries accordingly. The other main thing to look at from this first stack is we've got this wildling symbol. This is in all 3 stacks, and essentially if you get this symbol, then we move up the wildlings token by 1 space. Right? There are also things such as mustering, which indicates that we will be getting new units on the board. The way that mustering works is we count up the total number of mustering points we have. For example, with Stark, we have a single castle and a single stronghold controlled by the Stark family. The castle gives us 1 mustering point and the stronghold gives us 2, for a total of 3. The way that this works is you can get a foot soldier for a cost of 1, you can get a boat for a cost of 1, or you can get a knight or a siege engine for a cost of 2. In addition, you can take a foot soldier and upgrade it to a knight or a siege engine for a cost of a single muster point. And that's pretty much how the mustering works. The key thing is that it has to be in a location where a stronghold or a castle is, and it must obey the supply chain. If you're upgrading, supply doesn't matter because you still have the same number of units. But if you're adding new units, you need to make certain that you watch those values. Boats are a little bit different. The way that they work is you can either muster them in a sea area next to where you've got a castle or a stronghold, or you can put them in a port. Ports are interesting because they technically count as a different area. They still get orders, but they don't directly attack, defend, or anything along those lines. I'll talk a little bit more about ports later on, but for mustering purposes, that's pretty much all you need to know. Next up, looking at our second deck, we have several very, very important things. First, and probably most importantly, is the Clash of Kings. The Clash of Kings card is when we bid on the influence track. The influence track is these three things right here. The way that bidding works is it's all a secret. We have our power tokens. Everybody, again, starts with 5 of these. And the way that it works is you will pick however many you want, starting with the Iron Throne, and you will say that, I don't know, you just put them in your hand like this and say, this is how many I bid, flip them over. I bid 3, everybody else has their bids, etc., etc. And again, in case of a tie, whoever is currently sitting on the Iron Throne picks who wins. So that person will potentially be higher up or lower up, whichever the Iron Throne current sitter happens to be. Once all of the bidding is done, then no matter what, even if you were lowest down, highest down, it doesn't matter, everything goes back to the collective pile. You don't get any change or anything like that. And the dominance tokens, if they change hands, this is when it happens. But again, whoever's on the Iron Throne, if they tie for first, for example, then they would probably want to put themselves in the Iron Throne, or keep it rather. The second stack, just like the first and third stack, also have the wildling symbols as well. There are some that just say that nothing really happens. There are others that allow you to, that make you reshuffle the deck and just all sorts of different things like that. Next up, looking at the third deck, there are a few things that limit the types of orders you can give, and that's the primary ones, where they will limit you to not using certain support or defense or things of that nature. There are also there's also one card that just makes the wildlings attack, and they will attack at the current value, right? So moving into that, the wildlings attack either when the card comes up from the third deck that says the wildlings attack, and or if the track gets up to 12. So it is possible for them to attack twice. The way the wildling attack works is everybody has their power, and they will send however much power they wish to the watch, so that everybody can go to the wall and defend against the wildling attack. After everybody has put up the however much power they wish, everybody flips it over, and you compare it to the amount that the wildlings are coming with. If you match it or beat it, then everybody wins. If you don't match or beat it, then everybody loses, and there are some problems. For example, there's always 2 losing conditions, or 2 bad conditions, bad things that happen, one for the lowest bidder and one for everybody else. In this example, the lowest bidder is reduced 2 positions on the supply track, and everybody else is reduced by 1 position. Again, you can't go below 0, and it'll re-reconcile after a new card comes up, but you're going to be limited in your militaries, and you're going to have to take units off the board more than likely. As for the highest bidder, if you win, only the highest bidder gets a reward, and it means that you are increased 1 position on the supply track. Again, it is temporary, and if the supply reconcile comes up, then you would immediately go back to where you are supposed to be. That does it for the Westeros phase. Again, this sort of sets the stage for the rest of the round because it can limit the types of orders that you're allowed to play during the planning phase and all of this kind of thing. And again, changing the influence markers potentially. Again, this is about the round order based off of the Iron Throne. It's based off of who's going to win battles and how many and what kind of special orders you're able to play. Next up is the planning phase. This is really where a lot of the political intrigue and alliance breakage and formation takes place. And it takes place in the form of the individual order tokens. There are several different types of order tokens, and again, everybody has the nice little player screen that describes what each one individually does. They take place in the order that they appear on here. They're numbered from 1 to 5. Essentially, we start off with raids. The raids will allow you to remove an adjacent raid, support, or consolidate power token. Okay? The special raid token, which is the one that has a little star on it, will allow you to also remove a defensive token. Next up is march orders. They're ones that have little axes on them. These do exactly what they sound. This is the main way that you're going to be moving your militaries around on the board. If you have a march order, on somebody just like this, then you will flip it over and these guys can move. So you can move both into a single one, you can move one into one and one into a different one or a different adjacent one, however you wish to do it. It doesn't matter. But essentially that is how you're going to be moving your militaries around and potentially going in for an attack against an opponent. The other thing is that the starred one gives you a +1 to your combat strength if you end up going in and attacking. Next is the consolidate power. Consolidate power is what allows you to get power tokens back, right? So this is very important because it'll allow you to bid on everything and essentially drop your influence on the board as you go. The way it works is you gain a power token plus you get one for each crown symbol in the area that it is. So again, we've got the little supply barrels and then we've also got crown symbols. Several areas, not very many, do have 2 of them. You can see down here on King's Landing we've got 2 crown tokens. So essentially if you were down there and you had a consolidate power, you'd flip it over and you'd get 1, 2, 3 power tokens just from that. So it's pretty good. Pretty good. The only thing is that you can't use it on sea areas. You do still put orders down for your boats, but consolidate power doesn't do anything on the ocean. As for the specialized one, if you use the starred consolidate power, that means that you are allowed to perform mustering as well. The mustering rules are the same as with the Westeros card, but you do it in that specific area. So if you do it in a stronghold, then you can have 2 points of mustering and get a quick army out of it, essentially. Next up is the defensive orders. You've got defensive orders that will give you +1 defensive power if somebody is coming in and attacking you. It's essentially turtling. As for the starred one, it's a +2 instead of a +1. Next up is the support. The support order is essentially the crux of the political intrigue around the table in this game. Because the support orders mean that you're not actually moving anywhere, but you're willing to help out any battles that will occur adjacent to you. The thing with the support orders is that you can help the attackers or the defenders. You can't help both, but you're going to send the entirety of your military might in there. The nice thing with support is that you're not actually risking your own troops. They won't die, they won't be casualties. However, you're also not necessarily going to be gaining anything except maybe some consideration with the other players. That's up to you, however you want to play it. And again, you can help the attacker or the defender. How you decide which one to help is entirely up to you and the negotiation. As for the starred power, it means that you get a +1 to any support that you are granting. Now again, this doesn't allow you to attack because you're not moving. It also doesn't do you any good for defending if somebody comes in and attacks you. One very important thing is that when you're doing a support, you cannot have a support that is simply adjacent to people who were moving. It has to be adjacent to the square where things are moving into and the battle is starting. Right? So the way that this phase works is everybody in turn order is just going to take all of their individual order tokens. They'll all be behind the screen. This is all done in secret. And what you'll do is everywhere you have units, you will take one of your order tokens and you will place them down. You'll place them face down, just like this. And again, you can put them wherever you want. You can put them, you have to put them with the boat. Everywhere you have any units, no matter how many there are, whether it's 1, 3, 4, whatever it is, whatever your supply is allowing, then you have to put down an order token for each one. Now this means that some players are going to have a lot more order tokens than others, but that's the way it is. And again, the way these are resolved is everybody's raid tokens are resolved first, starting with the first player, and then everybody's march orders are resolved next in order, and then we have all the combat and all that kind of stuff essentially. But that goes into the action phase, right? After this is the end of the planning phase where everything has been placed down, and then during the action phase we reveal them, and that is when we actually go through and perform whatever the actions are. The important thing to note is during the march orders, you will go through and do the march and then the subsequent combat at the same time. You don't wait for the combat, you go ahead and you do that, and then you wait until later to do, for example, the consolidate power tokens. But again, the march, defense, and support all essentially occur at the same time, because that's potentially when all 3 of those are going to be used, and then consolidate power happens at the very, very end of the round. Again, in order of the people doing it. Now, ordinarily what I would do at this point is I would give you guys an example of a full round of what this game looks like. The problem is that's rather difficult to do because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of moving parts here. So instead what I'll do is I'll give you a situation that involves all of the different orders and essentially just show you how it's going to resolve. And it'll use pretty much all of the different components that I've mentioned up until this point. Alright everybody, I finished up the planning phase and now we're ready to move into the action phase. Essentially I took the same stuff from the board and just added some more units so that we can have this nice big combat right here in the middle, and I'll also show you some of the other mechanics that are really important. As before though, Baratheon is still seated on the Iron Throne, which means that their orders are going to resolve first. And again, if we look at our player cards, then we know that raid orders will go first. If we look at our board, we only have a single raid token here, and that is by the Lannisters here in Riverrun. And remember, the raid tokens are able to get rid of adjacent support tokens. So you notice we got a lot of support tokens, we got a few march orders, and a few other things. So we can get rid of support tokens, we can also get rid of consolidate power tokens. The only thing that's adjacent is there's a support token with the Starks over here at the Mountains of the Moon. And we know from playing this game that the Starks and the Baratheons are kind of friends still. So I have a feeling that if I go in and attack the Baratheons, then the Starks are not going to want to help me out. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and take their support token and burn it. So that means that that token is now gone and they won't be able to do anything. And then I'll take my raid token and I'll take it back as well. So that's it for that. Again, it was only a single raid token, but now we do all of our march orders. And again, we resolve these in order. So first up is Baratheon. And you notice we've got a march order over here, we've got one right here, and that's it for the Baratheon. So what they're going to do is they're going to take this boat right here, and they are going to go ahead and move it up here into the narrow sea. Now, I will demonstrate how the ship movement works. This works very similarly to several other games where you're sort of hopping along ships, right? So this move order is done. We're going to leave this ship here, and essentially we can take out either our knight or our foot soldier here, and actually here, let's do that. So we move it in there because this is an island. So we essentially jump on this boat, we jump on this boat, and then we can jump down here into, what is that? Kingswood. So that is essentially how that works. That's how the boat movement works. And you can have as many boats as you want jumping around here. And whenever you do the moves, then again, you can split up the armies, you can leave them together, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that you either move some of them, move all of them, it really makes no difference, okay? So that was it for Baratheon's moves. Next up, according to our Iron Throne track, is the Lannisters for their moves. Right, so we've got a march order here for a boat, and we will go ahead and just move down here into the Sunset Sea because it doesn't really matter that much. And again, part of the problem is you can only play so many of the special tokens, so you got to make sure you do good things. Now, we've got a march order down here with these two guys. We've got a footman and a knight. And what we're going to do is we're going to split these guys up. One of them is going to go down here to Highgarden, and the other one is going to go to the Reach. So now we have controlled not one but two additional. We've got a castle and a stronghold here, so that means that our token would move up on the victory track. Here's the thing though, we have now left the Sea Road marches empty. When you do that, you have a choice. If you have power tokens, you can take a power token and place it in that location to indicate that you still have influence there. In this case, I would be able to maintain that supply barrel that this gives me. If I didn't do that, if I didn't put that token down, then I would go down on the supply chain, which is obviously very unfortunate. But here with that move, I've now gained 2 supply, and I've gained 3 points of mustering and 2 points on the victory track. So not bad for a single march order. Moving on again with the Lannisters, I have one more march order, and it's right here in Stony Sept. And the idea is that I really want to go and I want to attack Harrenhal, which is currently being held by the Baratheons. So what does that mean? Now we're going to be doing some combat. I have a march march order of +1, they have a defensive +2. I've got a knight and a siege tower. The siege towers give you +4 to combat if you are attacking an area that has either a castle or a stronghold. In this case, it does. We've got a little castle token or a castle symbol right here. So as of right now, our initial combat strength, as it's called, is I'm going to have 4 for the siege engine, 2 for the knight, so that's 6 +1 for my marching order. For the defense, they are going to have 2 because they've got 2 footmen, +2 for their special defense token for a total of 4. So that is the initial examination of the combat strength. Next up, we're going to do the shout out for support. And again, there's support all over the place. We've got support from Baratheon, we've got support from Greyjoy, we had support from the Starks, but thankfully my raid token took care of that. Now the Greyjoys, they're kind of fans of the Lannisters, at least in this game they're going to be. So what they're going to do is they are going to give their power of 3, in this case a foot soldier and a knight, to the Lannister side. And again, this isn't one where they're going to move in with me. They're not going to get that castle or anything along those lines. All that's going to happen is they are just going to sit there, right? But they are giving me the strength of another 3. So that means I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 against what is currently 4. Now, the Baratheons do have a foot soldier with a support token, so they're going to add another 1, giving them a total of 5 to 10. So it seems like it's going to be a little bit of a blowout here. But here's the way that combat works. Now, we will all pick our house card. So the house cards are very interesting. On the house cards in the top left-hand corner, it tells you how much combat strength it's going to add. So these range from 0 to 4 typically, and everybody only has a single 4, and the way that it works is that these cards are always available for viewing. The ones that you have available and the ones that you have used, the ones that you've discarded. They are always available for people to see what all you've got. Right? So that's very important to have. All of these just have, most of them at least, have text on them that will tell you what they do. For example, Tyrion, you may immediately cancel your opponent's chosen house card and return it to his hand. He must then choose a different house card to reveal. If he has no other house cards, he cannot use a house card in this combat. So that's Tyrion's specific text. As far as the symbols are concerned, there are 2 major symbols that you want to look at. Let's take a look at the Hound and Jaime Lannister. So for the Hound, we've got 2 of these symbols. They look like fortifications, and that's exactly what they are. Essentially, they cancel out the swords. The swords work by, at the end of the combat, these will kill off units. Normally, units don't die. Instead, they have to retreat and they get rerouted. If you have these fortifications, then you prevent the killing by those sword symbols, though. Okay, those are the 2 different symbols that you'll see, but you've got all sorts of different stuff. Like here we've got Tywin Lannister, who gives you 2 power tokens if you win. And if we take a look at the Baratheons here, they've got some pretty interesting stuff. If you win, you can upgrade one of your footmen to a knight, and that is Renly Baratheon in this case. All sorts of interesting stuff. And again, it's going to depend on the situation. Like right now, Baratheon's probably going to lose. So, you know, we'll see what we can do here. So in this case, we'll go ahead and pick Patchface for the Baratheons because it's a 0. It doesn't add any combat value. And after combat, you can look at your opponent's hand and discard one of your choice. So this is good because we know we're going to lose. We're kind of in trouble here. And then for the Lannisters, let's see here. Let's go ahead and use this nasty little bugger. Sir Gregor Clegane. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, but essentially he's got 3 swords, so that means that we can potentially wipe out the entirety of them. So we both play our house cards face down, flip them over. I add another 3, they add nothing, so they automatically lose. Ordinarily, they would retreat, but in this case, because I've got swords, both of their footmen would die, and they would go back to the supply. Let's say, for example, I played a different card, and I played Tywin Lannister instead, which is if you win this combat, you get 2 power tokens. So clearly I won, so I'll take 2 power tokens from the supply and put it behind my player screen. And then the 2 Baratheon units have to retreat and be routed. So what that means is they need to go back to a friendly place and they need to just sort of sit there and they get laid on their side. You cannot retreat into the location that the attackers came in from. You have to go somewhere that is either empty or has other units from your house. So in this case, they'll just head back to where this support token is, and then once they're there, you lie them both on their sides. If you have routed units, they do not count in combat. So in other words, if I were to go and attack there, then those two units would not be able to defend and they would automatically die. Routed units cannot run, right? So they would just sort of sit there. But I have succeeded at my attack. So now both of these tokens go away. So that goes back to Baratheon. This goes back to the Lannisters. And again, I have cleared out a location that the Lannisters used to be in, so I will take one of my power tokens and I'll put it in there to claim it and say, yes, that is still mine. In other words, I'm still getting that, that particular crown. Now, the way that this works is anytime somebody moves into a location that just has a power token and no enemy units, essentially the power token is just removed. So if Greyjoy was marching, they could march over here back to the sea-found moors that I had earlier, and it would just take my token and put it back in the pile, essentially. That's how that works. And the same thing goes for any of the houses, essentially. But that's how the routing works. During the final portion of the action phase, after the consolidate powers have been done, the routed units would stand up and they would be available for use on the next round. But essentially, if you just attack, 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 then you can take out the units much more easily. So, that said, we've done all of the Lannisters' marching orders. Greyjoy has a marching order on their friendly port over here, and I mentioned that I'll explain a little bit about how the ports work. So a friendly port is one that has a ship that belongs to you. You can have up to 3 ships in a single port. They are able to raid the adjacent sea. They can, you can also muster units into a port, even if there are enemy units in the adjacent sea zone as well. Normally, if you have units in the sea, then they can support the adjacent land areas. For example, this Lannister ship could assist here. However, if they are in port, they cannot do that. You can't lend support to the adjacent sea areas. You can move into them and attack, but you can't lend support to them. But again, you can raid. The other major thing with ports is during the Game of Thrones Westeros card, which is where you get power depending on the number of crowns you have under your control. You also get power for each individual friendly port. So it's good to keep those on hand and have them available, but essentially you can move in and out with regular marching orders, and if they are out of the port, they count as a boat on the sea and you can use it for the ship transport. So for example, I could move from the island out here just like that if I had a marching order and things of that nature. If you're in the port, then you cannot use it as a transport ship, however. Okay, so that's a little bit about ports. Last but not least, we've got consolidate power. Baratheon, again, is the first player, so they are on King's Landing, which has 2 crowns, plus the 1 crown from their consolidate power, means that they will get a total of 3 additional power icons due to that consolidate power, and that would go behind their player screen. So that's the end of the action phase, and again, during the cleanup phase, we're going to remove all of the tokens, so anything will go back to their respective owners, available for play in the next round. And then after that, we will go ahead and we will stand up any of the routed units. Any cards that were played during combat will go to the discard pile. As you may be able to guess, after you have used all of your cards, that's when you reshuffle and you get your hand back. But again, all of the cards that you have used or not used are always available for people to view, except when you are actually picking them for the combat. In that case, then nobody is actually allowed to look at them. But otherwise, they're always available for anybody to see. Right? So you have your discard pile and your available pile for your hand. And then at the beginning of the next round, with the start of the Westeros phase, we're going to take the round marker and move it up to the next round. And then we keep going and we keep playing until a winner is declared and the Game of Thrones has ended. I mentioned earlier that we have these neutral tokens primarily in the southern portion of the map here. So I'll give you an example with this one, the Bone Way. For 4 or 5 players, it has a defense of 3. And all that means is that you need an attack power of 3. So for example, you could have a knight and a footman, you move in there and you attack and that's it. And then you're able to go in. There's essentially just a little bit of resistance, but it's nothing substantial. And you don't play a house card or anything along those lines. You just need to have that amount of power and you're able to get in. Most of the other locations where the houses start have those types of things. So for example, down here at Sunspear, we've got a 5 defense. In order to go and get that, there's a stronghold, a crown, and a supply barrel. And then on the back, if you have only 3 players, we've got that little tilde sign, which means that no matter what, nobody is able to go to that location if you're playing with only 3. Most of the southern portion of the board is locked down if there are only 3 players. Last but not least, I did want to briefly mention the Tides of Battle optional module that this game has. This is something that is a separate deck of cards that each person will draw from at the end of a battle, if you so desire. These are primarily things that will indicate the ebb and flow of combat and sort of the unexpected issues that you can have, things of that nature. And they include primarily pluses to power. So you've got +0 up to 3, essentially. You also have additional swords, fortifications, and those kinds of things. Essentially just the house card symbols. The other major thing that it adds is the skull symbol. The way that this works is no matter what, whether you won or lost, your opponent loses that many units. So they get to pick who they lost, but they must lose them. All right, so with that, that's it for my demo. Again, I know it's big, I know it's long, but it's a really fun, absolutely incredible game. I hope that you enjoyed this demo. I'm going to go right on now into some general conclusions as well as pros and cons for it. Well, folks, I hope that you enjoyed my gameplay demo for Game of Thrones. Like I said, it is an incredibly deep, absolutely amazing game. And as I mentioned, I'm going to go right on ahead into some pros and cons as well as just overall conclusions. First and foremost, the pro that I love is the fact that they really captured a very good essence of what Game of Thrones is about, the actual series, whether the TV series or the books and all that kind of stuff. Now, I will admit that I am not fully caught up on everything, so I don't know entirely what happens. But just the fact that you have the really heavy political intrigue, you have characters that are straight out of the books, all of that kind of stuff, not to mention all the locations. I mean, it's great in that sense. So if you appreciate the intellectual property, chances are that you're going to appreciate this game. Next up is the uniqueness of the political tracks. Those influence tracks are something that I've never really seen in any other game, at least not to that extent. And I think it's an incredible addition because it means that you as a player can sort of focus on a couple of different things. You can try to go for the Iron Throne, which means that you potentially have better chances at getting rid of your opponent's orders through the raids or things of that nature, or just being able to attack first, and not to mention breaking the ties and all this kind of thing. You can go with fiefdom so that you can be combat heavy, or you can go with the King's Watch so that you can just sort of muster up and turtle in a lot better, play a lot more of those specialized orders and all of those kinds of things. So there are a lot of options for any playstyle really with all of those political tracks. Not to mention the fact that you've got the alliance making and breaking with the support orders as well as through the influence tracks and all of those sorts of things. There is a lot going on in this game and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite aspects for it. The next pro that I wanted to talk about with this is that the game is relatively good as far as having fewer than 6 players. Now, I've only played fully through as 6 players one time, and frankly, it was pretty rough. It was really difficult. A lot of people were newbies, so it was kind of difficult to do, but I have played with 3 and 4 players a few times, and it goes relatively smooth. Having those neutral force tokens and those kinds of things means that you can sort of bolster up a little bit more effectively and a little more efficiently, and not only that, but closing off portions of the map means, again, similar to Small World, like I mentioned earlier, then having a smaller area to fight over means that there's going to be more fighting, and frankly, it makes the game a little bit more interesting. The other really major pro that I had for this game is, unlike a lot of these relatively heavy strategic games, even though you've got downtime in this game, you're always wanting to pay attention. You're going to see analysis paralysis and things of that nature, but whatever's happening on the board is really always going to be affecting you. Now, whether it directly affects you as far as what are you going to do next round or anything like that, maybe not. But if you see somebody really going for a land grab or something like that, maybe you start to ally yourself with them, at least temporarily, or maybe you just make a truce with them so that you can collectively fight somebody else. You know, things along those lines. There's there's always something important to be paying attention with. This is not by any means a game where it's multiplayer solitaire and everybody's just doing their own thing. This is very much a heavily integrated, very player-driven game on all facets. That said, moving on to the cons, there are just a few that I wanted to mention. First and foremost is, again, like most strategic and heavier games, it is an endeavor. While this isn't so bad, not as bad as, say, like Twilight Imperium, you don't have to like set aside a day to play this, you do need a good probably 3.5, or potentially even 4 hours to play this, especially if you're playing with new people who have never done it, and especially if you're playing with the full 6 people. It is simply a big game. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's not inherently a bad thing. It is a good big game, but it is nonetheless a big game, and it's something that you really should plan for. It's not something that is really going to spontaneously happen and you'll be able to play pretty much whenever. That said, that leads me right into my next con, which is, again, the number of players. I mentioned as a pro that the balance is reasonably good. However, as you get more and more players, it tends to be better and worse at the same time. It's better for the sake of the political aspect, because having more people at the table means that there's more stuff going on, there's more ability to ally and reject and backstab and all that kind of stuff. So I love that aspect. You guys know I love negotiation games, but at the same time, when you have that many people, then the table talk can very easily take over the actual game. And in something like diplomacy, that's almost encouraged, because again, the meat of that game is within the diplomatic aspect. But in this, you do want to try to keep things moving forward at least a little bit more efficiently. The last con that I really wanted to talk about was, again, the IP. Now, as always, this is a double-edged Valyrian steel. The problem with the IP in this is similar to the problem with IP in something like Munchkin. While Game of Thrones is a great game and it's a wonderfully strategic game, if you don't appreciate the intellectual property, you just miss out a little bit. It's not as bad as with Munchkin, where you just won't get any of the jokes and the game ends up not being fun pretty much in the slightest, but with this you still have good meat. You have a good game regardless of what the sort of IP is tacked onto it. However, at the same time, if you don't enjoy it, you're just going to be missing out on a layer, essentially, and it's just that little bit of extra that you love to see in a game like this, that little bit of flavor that just makes you think like, am I going to play my house as they would normally play, or am I just going to play it how I as a player would want to play, and stuff like that. And honestly, I don't recommend playing as the houses would play, because that's probably not going to work too well, but you guys get my point. It's one of those games where the IP is tied so closely into what the game actually is that it's much easier to appreciate the little details if you have the background knowledge to go along with it. But with that, like I said, that's my last real con for it. Again, this is one of my favorite games of all time. I really don't have a lot bad to say about it. The only big issue that I really do have with it is the fact I can't play it nearly as often as I would like to. It's simply too big, it's too heavy, doesn't work for my friendly local game store. The people who go there tend to go there for the lighter, shorter games, which is fine by me, but this is one that I generally have to plan for, even though it's not as big as some of the other ones that I have. But it is wonderfully strategic, tremendously fun, absolutely incredible political game, arguably one of the best political intrigue, influence sort of base games that I have ever seen since I've been gaming. I highly recommend it if you haven't tried it already. And with that, thank you very, very much for watching my review and demo for A Game of Thrones, the board game. I hope that you enjoyed it. As always, please leave any and all thoughts in the comments below. You guys know I love to hear from you. And with that, thank you again, and I will see you next time.